We need to talk about the South African Police Service, the problem of violent crime in South Africa, and of course our response to this. The Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, has said that people who want him out are simply saying this because they are jealous of him. But let's talk about the murder rate in South Africa for a moment. Murder rates are usually presented as a number per 100,000 people per year. And the global average is around 6. In other words, 6 people murdered out of every 100,000 people every year. In South Africa, that number has now risen to 46 per 100,000. And very significantly, according to the police themselves, one of the major contributing factors to this rising number in murders and attempted murders in South Africa is vigilantism and mob justice. Now, of course, we need to ask the question, why is vigilantism and mob justice on the rise in South Africa? Now, the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, the same person who claims that we are jealous of him, is saying that this is unacceptable and that this has to stop. But there's no proper plan attached to his announcement. It's just an announcement. And so he's saying that we are in a dark tunnel and we can see light in the end of the tunnel. Now we must just hope that it's not a train. Very assuring words coming from the Minister of Police. According to a new report, there are currently 51,085 civil claims against the South African Police Service. And in the last financial year, 12,842 new claims were filed. And the vast majority of these claims have to do with unlawful arrests and unlawful detentions by the police. Now, this all builds up to a total of more than 108 billion rands for which the South African police is currently being sued. This is more than their annual budget, which is 102 billion rands. And in this new report, concern is also expressed about collusion between the police and particular law firms in this regard. Now, what is the police's response to this? Castle Matale, the Deputy Minister of Police, is saying that they intend to bring this number down by installing body cams on the police. Now, this is a very interesting response because what this Deputy Minister is effectively saying is that the police are not to blame, that they are sued unfairly, and that they lose these cases despite the fact that there was no misconduct. And if they install body cams on the police, they would prove that these people have not been arrested unlawfully. Now, if you live in South Africa, you probably know someone who has been arrested unlawfully. And you would probably know that the problem is not that the police are being accused maliciously. But there's also an important thing here, which is that announcing that body cams would somehow solve the problem is also to externalize the problem. It's to say that we are not to blame, that there are scapegoats out there and we will find out who they are because we are actually innocent. It's the same type of thinking that we had with Eskom when the president announced that the major problem with Eskom is sabotage and not incompetence. Simply saying that you will install body cams on the police to prove their innocence is not going to solve the problem. But there's another fascinating thing. The police is concerned about the fact that they have spent 99.9% of their budget, but somehow, despite this fact, they have only achieved 67% of their goals. Now, evidently, they seem to believe that if you just spend more money, you will reach more of your goals, when of course we do know that this is not the case. Corporate Governance 101 teaches that a budget is not a target. You should not strive to spend 100% of your budget. A budget is an instrument that assists you on the route to achieving your goals, not the method through which you achieve your goals. But we need to make some comments about the broader picture here. Now, as we have said before, that if a government has only one duty, only one task to fulfill, that duty is to keep its citizens safe. Now, the South African government is not able to fulfill this duty. In fact, the former National Police Commissioner has said exactly this, speaking in Parliament, saying that the South African police are not able to fulfill their constitutional mandate. Now, even though the South African government isn't able to fulfill its most basic function, they are still very concerned about micromanaging all sorts of different aspects about our lives, such as the racial composition of the boards of private companies, and during COVID, even the extreme cases of what sorts of shoes and the temperature of the food that we could buy. So in 2001, we had these infamous KwaZulu-Natal riots, which was estimated to have cost the KwaZulu-Natal economy more than 20 billion rands. And what's very significant about these riots is firstly the fact that the South African police was largely absent, that it was mostly or primarily private security and local community safety initiatives that took control of the situation and that protected people's private property. But what is also quite telling is the response by this very same Minister of Police, who is now claiming that we are jealous of him, when he said, somewhat ambiguously, that they didn't respond to the problem as they should have because they never received intelligence. But the problem with the South African police is much deeper than that. Already in 2013, it was found that there is a severe problem of convicted criminals who are acting as officers in the South African police service. In fact, it was found that there are 1,148 serving police officers who are convicted criminals. Among them, 1 Major General, 10 Brigadiers, 21 Colonels, 10 Majors, 43 Lieutenant Colonels, 163 Captains, 84 Lieutenants, and 716 warrant officers. Now, this was a big news story when it was published, but a year later, it was found that nothing had been done by the leadership of the police to cleanse the South African police service of criminal elements within its own leadership structures. Now, one recent poll has found that 73% of people in South Africa don't trust the police, and another poll has found that 60% of people in South Africa do not feel safe when they walk around in their own neighborhoods at night. Now, what we also saw in South Africa over the last few decades is the spectacular rise in private security and community safety initiatives in response to this problem. Up to the point where the private security industry in South Africa is now said to be the biggest private security industry in the world. Now, currently, there are over 10,380 registered private security companies in South Africa, with more than 2.5 million registered private security guards, of which 556,000 are active and a further 2 million are in reserves. So one study has found that in South Africa there are 2.5 private security guards for every police officer. Now, getting back to this issue of the police being sued for unlawful arrests and detentions, it certainly is a very serious problem in South Africa, and I've personally been involved with multiple such cases, and we should sue the police when they do this. Other than the obvious reason why we should sue the police for this, we should also add that every rand that is not in the wallet of the South African government is a rand that does not have a very high probability of being stolen or being spent on fruitless and wasteful expenditures. Now, getting back to the solution to the problem, it's very important to underline that there are not merely 2 spheres, but 3. It's not only the public sphere and the private sphere, but also the community sphere. What we are witnessing in South Africa at the moment is a very striking form of creative destruction. In the ashes of a failing government, we see the rise of private security and community safety initiatives. And we have now reached the point where if you are robbed or a victim of violent crime in particular, people tend to call private security before they call the police. But the problem with private security, of course, is that it has to be profitable. And this is why it's so important for community safety initiatives to partner up with private security. Community safety initiatives is about a community taking control of what is important to them, protecting their own inalienable rights that are not protected by the South African government, regardless of whether it's profitable or not. A community safety initiative is a community that gets together to start its own neighborhood watch, to buy radios, to start driving patrols, to partner up with private security in their community, and also to have a good relationship with the South African police in as far as it is possible. And in this regard, AfriForum is really taking the lead with more than 150 community safety structures all over South Africa. These structures have many success stories. We can see repeatedly when a community gets together, when they organize themselves, when they start taking ownership, when they are vigilant, when they buy radios, when they communicate with each other, when they drive patrols, all of these things, we find that there is a decrease in crime. And there are many such success stories. One of my favorites is the Elliot story, where the local AfriForum branch and the local taxi association started driving patrols together. As a result of this, we saw a decrease in stock theft, for example, by almost 99% in just 1 year. Now, some concluding remarks. Firstly, if the Minister of Police claims that people are jealous of him, he would do well to explain to us what exactly is it that he thinks people are jealous of. Because we do know that we are in a war against crime in South Africa. We do know that the South African government and the South African police service are not coming to the table in terms of doing what they ought to be doing. And we do know that private security and community safety initiatives are stepping up to fill this void. South Africa has a very serious problem as far as violent crime is concerned, but we also know that it's not evenly distributed. We do know that some communities are much more vigilant and much more safer, while others are much more vulnerable. And tragically enough, it is those who are most dependent on the South African government through things like social grants and so forth, who are also most vulnerable to violent crime. While it is those who are least dependent on the South African government, who are most involved with their own communities, who are the best protected against this problem. In South Africa, we are now experiencing problems that much of the rest of the world, and the Western world in particular, will probably experience in the decades to come. And so in this sense, as I have said before, we could much rather be described as ahead of the curve than behind. At the Solidarity Movement, we are very much convinced that we are now in the process of finding solutions that the rest of the world will look to in the years to follow. And the most important part of the solution is the return to community. The return to taking ownership of the things that matter to us. The return to taking care of our own safety, now in the absence of a government fulfilling its most basic functions. And we have found in South Africa that when communities do this, they are indeed able to secure a future for themselves.